when the museum approached me with this idea of talking about the Chinese community, I thought, wow, how thoughtful, how timely, given the time we live in, and the approach they are taking in terms of inviting not just the academics to share their expertise, but also community help. Because after all, much of this history we are talking about tonight really remains scattered, poorly documented, dimly known in many cases. They may be housed in various whole families or places that we still don't know. So much of this process of unearthing, knowing more about Chinese American history in the region will have to be done with partnership from the public, with help from various entities. At the same time, I also thought how brave of them to invite a professor to come up here to talk about history, because once you get them to start talking, you never know when they may stop or not, but I will try to make sure that we have the timing here right. As April also said during this presentation, I'll also be inviting Mr. Haibi to come up here and share a few pieces from his instrument, guzheng, called the Chinese zither. It's an instrument often associated with deep cultural sophistication, with many classical Chinese music pieces played on this kind of instrument. So it's a rare treat that we get to have this. Let me start by thanking the museum for inviting me, and also I want to thank Mrs. Ming Kwang from Music Fusion Northwest for really encouraging this. She did much in organizing it, and the logistics of it. Without her, this would be impossible. And also, I want to thank Mr. Bihai for agreeing to really treat us with his music in just a little while. So let me start our story with some broader context. I thought this would sort of help it make sense in terms of helping us see the ways in which the Chinese community here in Vancouver has kind of developed over time. Some of the reasons and processes behind all of this really have a lot to do with what happened on the other shores of the Pacific, in addition to even more shores, maybe in the South China Sea, but we're not going to go that far. Okay, so very briefly, Chinese immigration to both the U.S. West, in terms of West Coast, this is California and Oregon, as well as the Pacific Northwest, Washington included, was a part of a broader population movement started in the 19th century, really emanating from the mainland part of China, specifically the southeast coast for the Chinese empire at the time called the Qing Empire. During that time, specifically in terms of the kind of people that immigrated eventually to North America, to the west coast of the United States, those people mostly came from the southeast part of China, today known as the provinces of Guangdong or Canton, as it used to be called, as well as Fujian. These two were responsible for really thinning out the vast majority. And in part because those regions historically had a long-standing tradition of immigration to other parts of the world. As this sort of a map on the left-hand shows, 19th century Chinese outward immigration really had a number of routes. North America was one of them. Other places include South America, as well as Australia, parts of Southeast Asia. The causes were several, so it's not just one thing. But one main component in terms of why Southeast Chinese went out, left their homeland, was in part because of a marginalization process of their economic situation. Really starting from the late 18th century when the Chinese economy began to decline, people in that area gradually lost more access to land. They lost access to forest type resources, as well as other water-based, such as rice paddy economy. So as a result, many chose to leave their home in search of work. So there was already population movement even before their movements to North America. Another factor that came from the outside was during that time, the British commercial power, the British naval power also began to rise And so what that did was to put pressure on southern part of China, southeastern part of China. And they, in addition to that pressure, for example, that pressure caused the people to also move away from some of the interior areas toward more of the coastal towns, which then prepared them for the subsequent voyage that they were going to take. Additionally, that British pressure also induced a number of conflicts between the British Empire and the Chinese Empire, which then they had a number of clashes. But the end of that is that the Qing government, the Chinese government, began to face tremendous pressure from that, which then helped start a number of major disturbances in the middle of the 19th century, collectively called by the historians as mid-century rebellions. There were several of them. Some of them are quite destructive. One of them, called the Taiping Rebellion, was particularly impactful on southern China because that's where it was located. When that thing was over, places were devastated, communities were broken up, but at the same time, it also forced the Qing government to relinquish its previous prohibition against going overseas, which then created opportunities for people to leave and go overseas in search of employment and other opportunities. And so this created what's called the coolie labor trade, meaning that you have different companies in Southeast Asia, for example, as well as in North America, beginning to go to China to try to recruit people who would go to their plantations, could be construction sites, or could be mining sites, to provide that labor, oftentimes cheap labor. And then these people were called the coolies, and they would oftentimes enter into a contract, maybe a contract lasting for 3 years. And then once they get a contract signed, then they will leave home to go to different destinations to do the kind of work they often did. In other words, this created the kind of a background for the kind of people that initially did the migration in terms of their motivation for migrating, as well as the methods they used to leave home. And then narrowing it down to immigration to U.S. West and the Pacific Northwest. That coincided with U.S. expansion westward. That is, the United States was coming to the western regions. That created the labor needs. For example, on some of the mining sites in the California Gold Rush, something we are all very familiar, as well as the transcontinental railroad constructions. Companies were in competition with each other to try to see who can compete with such projects earlier. So the labor needs was there, and then the coolie trade basically played into that labor market. This then created a labor-oriented Chinese immigration. Immigrants, this generation of immigrants basically came to offer labor because that was what was available to them. Because of various reasons, such labor immigration could cause, and did cause, frictions with people in the host country, United States, for example, which then are responsible for creating various kind of anti-immigration or anti-Chinese sentiments. One of them was called the Yellow Peril campaign, depicting these immigrants, again, who were laborers, right, lower social class laborers, as a kind of a competitor, as a kind of a threat, if you will, to social order. Then you have a series of U.S. immigration policies designed to restrict that gradually, and then that culminated in the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. And what that act did was to prohibit further immigration. No more laborers could be brought to China. And so because of that, and then coinciding with some of the termination of the railroad project, that meant more people, more of the Chinese laborers began to go out of California and move northward. So they end up coming to this area in the Pacific Northwest. I have a little picture here of Fort Vancouver in 1845, basically showing that in this still largely frontier kind of a town community, the military had a dominant presence in terms of the community makeup. So I'm very grateful for the Clark County Museum here for helping me with providing some of the census data, that we have some numbers at least to kind of get an idea of this very first generation of Chinese immigrants, what they were like, what the community was like. And so as I look through these records, several things kind of stand out as the predominant features. Number one, most of them were 20s. Mid-20s or mid-30s, incredibly young people, which makes sense. They came here to do work, right? Hard physical work. Only 4 people were in their 50s, so it made me curious about, why they came here. So that could, the census doesn't give us any reason or an explanation about, their background, but it does provide a lot of, opportunities for us to ask questions about these people. They're also predominantly single male, single men. I counted all the records that we have. Altogether, from 1850 to about 1887, you have about 171 people that's recorded on the census. This doesn't mean that we're only 171 people in Vancouver. It simply means that the census only listed 171 people. Only one of these is listed as a female. Her name's Lois Curry. I don't know what this is obviously a English rendering, right, of her Chinese name, and I no way of knowing what the original form might be like. She was aged 17 at the time of the census. And then I noticed next to her is listed a man called John Curry. Same last name, so probably even related to each other. She could be his, relative or even family member, possibly. And his age was 30, so about 13 years older than she was. And also, I looked through the list. You see also some common family names in there, indicating possible family relations. If that's the case, you could have the case of where people immigrating together. You may have like a brother and sisters, or even husband and wife, or parents and children doing it together. This is also a group predominantly working class in terms of their position. In terms of their occupation that's listed on the census, 17 of them was listed as laborer, without further specification about what kind of a labor were they doing. 3 of them were listed as a watchman, 4 as a cook, and 2 as servants. 2 were merchants. Later on, if you look at the later census, you can get a little sense of what those merchants possibly could mean. This could indicate people operating little stores, maybe some kind of a small trade, which then by 1910 could mean that they were beginning the process of getting economically better off. Of the total of 171 people, 34 of them had listed 115 without a name actually on the record. Their name is collectively known as Chinaman. It's sort of given as their name. Probably a further indication this is again, working class group of people. These laborers, once they came to the United States, apparently also interacted with our ecology here, our environment here, in that we have 2 little pieces of curious references here. One's called a China Ditch, another Shanghai Creek. Apparently some kind of a construction work. Oh, what about one? Oh, is that right? So apparently located somewhere like in today's 172nd Street, somewhere like to the east of here. It looks like it could be possible group of Chinese laborers were employed here in creating this project. And again, we don't know a whole lot more about who were employed and what happened to these people. But again, here maybe the community can come in to kind of provide, if anybody has more information on either one of these, that would be an interesting thing to discover. Then we come, next census record we have is 1910. So about 40 years has elapsed, right, from the 1860s. By this time, if you compare the records from the previous one, we see the community size decreased. basically from the 171, right, group size previously, now to about less than half of that, 85 people left in this. And among these 85 people, I counted there was one large family that had at least 10 people. So if you exclude this one big family, you have even a smaller community here. We here see marriage and family begin to emerge. No longer was this community just solely single, unmarried people. And now of this 85 people, 18 men had marital status specified as married, and 16 of them as single, because they specifically said those people were single. You have some men who said they were said to be married, others were left blank. We don't know whether they were either single or married. But at least this tells us you at least have 18 people, 18 men who were married. Again, one man whose last name is Lee, his wife is also listed, and plus there are 8 children. And there's a reference in there that says they are born in California. So that tells us they came actually from California, at least those children did. So this indicates that by this time you have a movement and relocation among these immigrants. Few people in the 1850s and 1860s period appeared in the 1910 report. So this can tell us it's possible that they either left Vancouver for some reason, or for some reason the name failed to be recorded. Which, if that's the case, this means that these 85 people could largely be from other parts of the United States, California included. Occupation-wise, domestic service and laundry work were pretty prominent. By this time of the census work, you have a lot of domestic servants, for example, as well as specific references to Chinese laundry work. Food industry employs quite a few people, and if you look through the census records, it specifies different kind of food industry workers. So you have a cook, baker, and chef. Again, we don't know exactly how each one of these is defined by this census time, but possibly indicating some kind of emerging specification, right, or stratification among these people. Maybe somebody who's done more cooking, maybe called a chef, as opposed to just a cook. Children from this Lee family, they are listed as they could read and write. So in other words, you have a literacy here beginning to emerge in the second generation of this immigrant community. So there are some of the snapshots here that we see. At this point, according to the program we have, can I invite Mr. Haibi here to kind of play a piece on his zither instrument? He chose some pieces that have some historical echoes to this kind of immigration experience that we've been talking about. So go ahead, please. Thank you very much for that performance. So continuing with our story, having gone over some of the broader picture of the community, we are pretty fortunate in being able to find some pieces of information on a couple of individuals. We even have individual people with pictures of their faces. Something that historians often find something that's very valuable. One of these, by the name of Wen Qin, with a picture of, there we go, with a picture of him, with a cap, hat, and a gown, and you notice a fan in his hand, a scroll, some kind of a book in his other hand. Possible indication of a gentry status. Of course, if you look at a picture of this in 19th century China, you would possibly, you can interpret this person to belong to either a landed person, gentry status, so possibly lower to middle class in the society at the time. So the piece of information we have about him comes from Clark County Genealogical Society. There's a quote here: the General Anderson family were at the barracks 12 years, about from 1886 to 1898. During that time, they had a Chinese man named Wen Qin, who practically ran the household. He practically ran the household. Okay, another intriguing reference, possibly some kind of a role he played in being a household manager, could be. This also can tie back to the fact that part of Eastern China historically also has a lot of people who were in the trade of managing household finances for other wealthier households. We don't know exactly whether he was from that background or not, but this is at least a possibility, given the fact that he was able during this time to have this kind of an influence in that household. Another person we found that's really interesting is by the name of Kwang Lai. Later on, his records is also known as Kong Loi. Again, this will be a name form that's from southern part of China. He has received quite a bit of media attention, apparently, because there's quite a few pieces about him in the newspaper. So we are able to know a bit more about this particular gentleman. He was born in 1867 from Guangdong province. Again, that canton as it used to be called. He immigrated in 1881 via Portland, Oregon, and he worked as a dairyman. So apparently some kind of dairy farm or dairy business. And this picture here is a little bit of a piece here in the newspaper with a picture of him indicating that he was, okay, that little thing has a mind of its own. This is a picture of him wearing this. He's wearing this broad smile on his face. It's a little maybe hard to see given how dark the photo is, but he's smiling broadly, and apparently with his unbridled kind of happiness or joy on his face, holding a bird between his two hands. Okay, so there. And this little blurb under the picture says that he found a bird called Chinese pheasant in a hayfield. And so apparently he really enjoyed that sight. The next piece of news we have him, he's become sorrowful next time because he was denied, his application for US citizenship was denied. Looks like unexpectedly, apparently because he's been in the community for a very long time, contributed to the community in various ways, apparently. We're going to see more of that. He was, again, a well-known Vancouver businessman here, and yet he was denied citizenship with, again, no explanation about the reason for his denial. More information about him. Then in 1915, we find him involved in a little controversy happening in Vancouver here. The Vancouver Grand Opera House was planning on putting on a show, a play called Trunk Murder in China, the Trunk Murder Mystery in Chinatown, I'm sorry. This is a story that happened in New York City at the time when there were reports about a white girl murdered in a trunk in an apartment near the apartment of another Chinaman. So that was the mystery. There was suspicion that he probably did it. He was the murderer. There were also suspicion that maybe it's another person who was involved in a love triangle who did the murder. In any case, this man ran away, and the authorities didn't really find him in the end. So this whole thing remained a mystery about who exactly was the murderer. And then there was a further mystery showing that the dead body of the white girl may not be the person that they reported her to be. So anyway, there was a lot of this going on, swirling around. And then there was a play made about it. So the Vancouver Grand Opera House was wanting to put this on. For some reason, Kang Loi opposed that idea. He objected to having this play be put on. So he objected to this idea. And then after that, the mayor of Vancouver here, Miss Kiggins, he went to a rehearsal of this show, and after seeing part of it, he said, "Oh, the play is fine." So the play ended up getting performed in the theater. And then there's also further report, an effort was made to have the sheriff and county attorney stop the performance, but they didn't. They would not act. And then another little thing, a fight was thought to have broken out in a dispute over the melodrama, with someone actually getting injured in this process. That's another thing. Very interesting reference when you think about a Chinese immigrant objecting to a play, right, being put on in this local theater. He apparently was involved in some kind of a cultural dispute with the theater. So very interesting information indeed about, it shows at least his sort of thinking at this time, his concern about possibly the cultural implications, right, of this kind of play being put on. The New Era Chinese band. There was a band. We have a Chinese band here in Vancouver history, and here's a picture of them. What got me really interested is actually how they dressed. I mean, look at the uniform. This is 1914. You have kind of almost like they dress almost in uniform, which then is really curious because the idea in that time, not only in China, but really throughout East Asia, in 1914, everything has to be new. The idea of newness was just all over, sweeping over East Asia. And part of being new was to dress exactly like how these people dress, with this kind of jacket, streamlined dress, indicating you're new. Now you're putting on a new fashion, as opposed to, do you guys remember the Wen Qing, how he was dressed in a gown and with a cap hat? Now they are dressing in this almost modern, even military-looking type of a uniform. Of course, they have the instrument. They're marching on a 4th of July celebration. So another interesting snippet of this. More on the Loi family here. We have a picture of him with his family, lovely family here, and various kind of a news report. One of them actually reported their wedding, his wedding.
It's on automatic advance.
Yeah, there we go. So his wedding was reported with also a picture of their, the marriage certificate, properly signed by all the relevant authorities, indicating this is a respectful, proper marriage. And then you'll have a long newspaper article called "Chinese Dairyman Overcomes Barriers to Success," calling him a successful businessman. And then the other piece is talking about his wife also playing an active role in the local community. She was part of different kind of organizations that were pretty prominent in the community. So we're looking at a pretty well-known family here, the Loi family, possibly telling us why he would want to be involved in a cultural dispute about a play, right, in the Vancouver theater. One more. Not only his Loi and his wife, but his kids, his children, seem to have done rather well. One of them, Percy Loi, actually served as a lieutenant in the Second World war in California. Upon retire, that's that right? Yeah. So that's a picture of him, Percy Lloyd. Yes. And so he served in the war, and after he retired, he got into business here in Portland and became also quite successful, apparently. The news article on the right is talking about putting up a new gate for the Chinatown, and for that they were trying to recruit money from different organizations. Each one of them donated to this project. So apparently an effort to beautify, expand the Chinatown project. And so this is another bunch of individuals that we're able to find in in our archive here in the Clark County Museum. I am sure there's many more others. And it'll be really fascinating if we can unearth more such individual stories, because they give us a range, right, of their encounters and experiences. So now Mr. B, again, he has another piece of music to play, and I'll invite him to come. Thank you so much. So this picture here, continue with our story. We're now in the 1970s, a new era really in the, oh boy, it goes faster than I do. A new era in terms of Chinese immigration history here. This is a new period with new kinds of immigrants coming here. We have a picture showing a businessman, Mr. Jerry Lee. He's here greeting his customers to this new restaurant. Apparently, he just recently opened. This is 1975. It's a Chinese restaurant on fourth Fourth Plain Boulevard. So the decor and his dress with the glasses and haircut indicating a respectful, this is a respectful businessman in our community by this time. This then has to do with the kind of features that Chinese immigration had to the community, to the Vancouver community, really beginning in the 1950s. By this time, the reasons for coming here, for immigrating to this Pacific Northwest region, had expanded beyond just merely to provide labor, right, as they happened previously. And now, or in terms of the immigration origin, we have a couple of different cases. Number one, people from Taiwan came to North America in considerable number. That's at the end of the Second World War. So the kind of Taiwanese people who came to America or to the Pacific Northwest tended to be from families or communities of upper to upper middle class background. They could possibly also be members of the government or the military, or certain members of the academia. So when they came to North America, sometimes the purpose for immigration was to pursue further education, sometimes even to pursue a kind of a semi-retirement lifestyle. In that if they were able to buy some real estate here in different parts of the United States. Another source of immigration was from Hong Kong after 1990s. There was fear about the Chinese takeover of Hong Kong Island. So business people, as well as other people from other walks of life, went out from Hong Kong. Many landed in North America as well. So this is also predominantly a business-oriented group. After 1980s, when China began to open a little bit more to interaction with the outside world, you begin to have more immigrants coming from the North China, northern regions of China, in addition to southern China as well. By this time, the kind of people that immigrated to North America included many academics, many, in fact, students who came here to universities and schools in pursuit of education. And in addition to these three, you also have, another one that's a continued internal migration. Chinese people would come to the Pacific Northwest, to Vancouver, to Oregon from other parts of the United States. Not done, quite done yet. And also, if you look at some of the broader information on this community, we find size continue to increase. More and more people have begun to come here, and family continuity seems to have getting better. Previous generations probably stay here only for a limited duration. Some then choose to go away after a period. Now you begin to have families putting down roots. They begin to have a second generation, some even begin a third generation. So they're more stable now in Vancouver community. Occupational diversity, community participation continued to widen by about 1990s, really going into 2000s. We pretty much find Americans participating in almost all walks of life here in our community, in terms of whether it's technology, business, education, government, or other type of services, you can find them there, all of these. And they participate in community events in more diverse forms as well. And also we see social, cultural, religious communities begin to take a more organized form. You begin to have churches being formed, for example. You begin to have Chinese stores and businesses, even schools, language programs, and so on and so forth. Some of this picture here also are from a program the Chinese community here put on, basically pretty much around the Chinese New Year time, Chinese Lunar New Year time, when they usually would have a cultural kind of a program there. Of course, during the pandemic, we don't have this anymore, but they used to have these kind of activities. So my time is up. To sum up, in other words, we're looking at a community here that's been here for different reasons during different periods of history. Now they are part of the community unity, playing active role. They have different diverse experiences historically. So a really rich kind of legacy that we have here in the Vancouver community. And my hope is that going forward, we may be able to have many more of such opportunities where you have the community can come together, whether it's academic community or just the public say, our museum community can sort of collectively discover more about our past roots. After all, the story of the Chinese community is a part, right, of the bigger story that we all share together here in Vancouver, Washington. Thank you all very much for your attention. I'm finished.